did we have COVID? All right, hey everybody. Well, February of this year was a very interesting month. A lot of people, including me, think that we may have had COVID-19 already. So I live in the US, in California. We got sick with something fairly mysterious back in February before they were testing for COVID-19 here in our county. So because they weren't testing yet, there were no known cases. But there are a lot of people, a lot of talk about how COVID might have actually been with us as far back as January or even December. And when I say we got sick, I mean me, my wife, and a bunch of our coworkers. And we all got sick right around the same time in February. And so the million-dollar question is, did we have COVID? We don't know for sure because we weren't able to get tested. So I'm going to walk you through the symptoms that we all had, but I'm going to go into much more detail about my own symptoms, day by day. It's very interesting. Back in January and February, we were having unusually warm and dry weather. Normally in January and February, it's rather cool, rainy, yucky, and cold. But we were having some record dry months and warm months. And we live in a tourist area. We get tourists from all around the world and country that come to visit us. I think we get like 10 million tourists a year. And because the weather was so unusually nice, in the middle of winter, we had a bunch of tourists. Tourism was off the charts, January, February. And the Bay Area gets direct flights from Wuhan. We do get a lot of tourists from China who come to the beautiful Napa Valley for our world-renowned wine and food. Foreign tourism is a really big segment of the industry here. So my wife and her coworkers do work around a lot of tourists. So we had a ton of foreign tourism around the time that COVID was beginning to spread around the world. So her coworkers started getting sick with something it seemed kind of unusual to a lot of us. I was actually the last one to get sick. So they got sick, my wife got sick, and then I got sick. I talked to 3 people that she works with about their symptoms and what other people had there. 2 of them actually had to go to the emergency room, and they had fluid in the lungs. I guess they were tested for influenza and tested negative. Big red flag right there. Well, what was it then? What was causing their pneumonia if it wasn't the flu? One of her coworkers told me about how he had just the worst body aches he'd ever had, and he sweated a lot. He had a fever, but he had, I guess, the worst night sweats he had ever had with any illness that he was sick with. At least one of them talked about how stuff didn't quite taste right, but I couldn't really get any stories about anyone completely losing their sense of taste or smell. So I couldn't nail down that, and that is, of course, a telltale sign of COVID, but one person at least did talk about things not quite tasting right, so that could be. Okay, so they all got sick. Then my wife got sick. She started with a little bit of like a irritated throat. It was a little bit sore and scratchy, and she felt a little tired, a little bit run down. Later that evening, she developed a cough, and it was kind of unusual for her because she doesn't ever remember really having an illness that starts with a cough. Usually, at least in my own experience, the cough comes later on in the illness. She had a wet cough, feeling a little run down, kind of scratchy throat. That lasted for a few days, and then it was over with. She never really got terribly sick. I don't even remember if she stayed home from work or not. I would say maybe about 5 days after she started showing symptoms, I started getting sick, and I got hit much harder than she did. but it started out more on the mild side. The interesting thing is that the symptoms, I went through like stages of symptoms, which I don't really remember going through with anything else I've been sick with. But I woke up one morning and I had planned to go to the coast. It's about an hour and a half drive from where I live to the beach. And I was actually going to go do some hiking that day. I was going to do about a 3.5 mile hike with a 1,000 foot elevation gain. So it was a fairly strenuous hike, and I planned on doing that. And so I started my morning, felt fine when I woke up, ate breakfast, got all my things together to go for the hike and go, enjoy a day at the beach after my hike. And I was running really late. I was kind of stressed out. There was a lot going on. Things were taking a little longer to get together, get things together to go to the beach. But I finally got everything together and got my stuff in the car, and noticed all the tires in the car needed to be inflated. They were, because the car hadn't been driven in a while. So it's like, another thing I got to do. I'm running late, and I just want to get the hell out of the house and go to the coast. And as I'm filling up the tires with air, just topping them off, and noticed I felt kind of a little bit run down. Felt a little bit on the rundown side. Could definitely feel like I was coming down with something, but I just carried on anyway. I at the time just thought, oh well, it's just a cold, and just kind of feels like a cold coming on. But I'm gonna go to the coast anyway and do my hike. So I got in the car after filling up the tires, and I'm driving to the coast, and during my drive there I developed a dry cough. Just this like nagging dry cough. My airway just felt, irritated. And yeah, just a dry cough, and still felt run down, and like, yeah, I'm definitely coming down with something. And I realized at that time that I was coming down with whatever my wife had and whatever everyone else had. And there was talk of COVID, of course, in the news at that time. But I didn't really think I got COVID or anything. Although I did think it was unusual that I was starting out with a dry cough. I'm like, this is unusual. Not really. This isn't normal for me. When I get colds or flus, I don't start with a cough. The cough comes later. But anyway, I get to the coast, feel about the same. I don't feel much worse. And I went for my hike. And I'm hiking, and it was much more difficult than usual to exert myself on this hike, because it really kind of brought out the fatigue and the malaise that I was feeling. I just kind of had this general feeling of feeling unwell, that I'm coming down with something, and brought that out a little bit more. And so but I carried on anyway. I'm the type of person who just likes to punch through the whatever under the weather I might be feeling. And I just carried on and trucked right on through it. I did my hike, and now it was time to go sit my butt on the beach for a few hours and just enjoy the coast. I felt a little bit worse. The malaise was a little bit stronger. Still had that stupid, annoying cough, the dry cough, unproductive cough. Just every few seconds, just, and ate my picnic lunch that I brought. I did notice that the orange I was eating kind of tasted yucky, but I don't know if it was the orange itself that maybe it really did taste yucky, or if maybe my sense of taste was a little bit wonky. I don't know for sure on that one. That one's inconclusive whether I actually had altered taste. So anyway, I get home from the coast, and I don't think I was running a temperature yet, but a fever. I don't think I was running a fever yet, but it seems like maybe my temperature was just slightly elevated. My baseline in the morning is 97.3, and that's if I take my temperature orally under the tongue. And then at night, I'm usually about 97.7 to 98.3 is my normal temperature. And I think I was running like 98.8, which is a little higher than normal, but nothing. Can't really call that a fever yet. Okay, so day 2 comes along and I feel worse. I feel even more malaise. Just really run down, starting to feel a little achy. My cough is a little worse. I think it was still a dry cough at that time. Temperature, I think, was maybe slightly elevated that morning on day 2. And then as the day wore on, my cough became a little bit more productive, but I was still coughing a lot. And I felt, of course, even more run down than I did that morning, and more than I did the day before. And day 3 comes along. Day 3, so day 3 and day 4 were the worst in terms of feeling run down and tired. So I felt a type of fatigue where I felt kind of drunk, but I wasn't drunk. I would stand up. It was hard to stand up. It was hard to do anything at all. And I'm like, this is weird. This isn't a flu. This doesn't feel like a flu, because flus come on suddenly and quickly. Hits you like a ton of bricks all up front. But this wasn't quite an up front, hit you all at once kind of thing. This was a gradually comes on sort of thing. And I'm like, but this is so much worse than any cold I've ever had. But not like any flu I've had. What is this? And by this time I had a fever. The fever fluctuated a lot. This one was like wild swings in my temperature. I'd be like normal in the morning, and then, well, normal-ish. It'd be like 98 something in the morning, and then by night I'd be, 99, 99.5. I had the chills, so I had the shaking chills, the low-grade fever, that just wild swings in the fever. I could hardly stand up or do anything, just felt awful, like a truck ran me over. Then at night I started developing these horrific body aches. These body aches were weird. I've had body aches with flus before, and a little bit with colds, but this was different. This felt like all my neural pathways were on fire. So every joint, every place I'd ever had a pinched nerve in my life was on fire. And it hurt just so bad, it was excruciating. And I'd never felt any body aches this severe before. It was horrific. And it was at night. It was the worst at night, when I was laying in bed trying to go to sleep. And I had really bad sweats. It seems like I would go to bed, and in the middle of the night my temperature would start coming down, and as it would be coming down, I'd be sweating like crazy, and just would wake up just sopping wet. And I have had sweats with flus before, but usually towards the end of the illness. But this was just different in a lot of different ways. All right, so day 5 comes along. Things are changing a bit. I still feel run down, but I feel better. I'm starting to actually feel better in terms of my malaise. I didn't feel I didn't have that general feeling of unwellness as much. I didn't feel as fatigued as I did before, but I was still coughing a lot. Still had a bad cough. And also I had developed, by about day 3 or 4, I developed bad congestion, really bad nasal congestion. But I didn't have a runny nose, and I wasn't sneezing at all, which is another weird thing, because with colds, usually with a cold I'm sneezing and I have a runny nose and I have congestion. But this time it was just the congestion. The runny nose didn't come until much, much later. This is interesting as we move along here. But day 5, I still had the congestion. I was feeling better physically, but my fever actually spiked on day 5. Day 5 was when my fever actually peaked, was at its highest. And I started out normal that morning. My temperature started out normalish that morning, and then started getting higher and higher and higher, the usual swings in the temperature that I was having. And then over the span of 2 hours, my temperature suddenly shot up to 102. And it shot up so fast that it freaked me out. I actually started wondering, am I going to have to go to the emergency room? Am I really sick with something bad here? I was really getting kind of worried at that point, because my fever just shot up suddenly in the afternoon for no apparent reason. and peaked at 102. And then I didn't take any kind of painkillers or fever reducers. I just went with it. And then and then by that evening, fever came down. It's the oddest thing, just because usually your fever's the highest in the evening. Fever came down quite a bit, actually. Went back down to like 99 something. Went from 102 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to like 99 point something by 10 o'clock that night. I still had a little bit malaise that night on day number 5, a little bit of malaise, but nothing severe. I could get up without feeling like I was going to faint, which was nice. Get up to go to the bathroom, fix myself some food without feeling like I was going to pass out, which was a pretty strong feeling the day before. The peaks in my fevers started getting less and less as the days went on, but the body aches continued every night till like night 7 or 8. The body aches were just horrific. By day 7, or day 8, I should say, the malaise was a little bit better. I still felt like I was sick with something, but I didn't feel as bad overall. My congestion was going away. My cough was still there. I had a wet, productive cough. Pretty bad. The second week is where things started changing. Maybe getting a little worrisome. By the second week, I started developing a runny nose. Really bad. Like, it was probably the worst runny nose I ever remember having. Like, it was just constant like a faucet. And I went through so many paper towels. It was crazy. I don't use Kleenex. I don't like Kleenex. It's too soft for me, and it just feels like it's going to break apart. So I like paper towels because they're tough. I'm like have this monster runny nose. I don't have a fever anymore. Fever's gone. I'm feeling a little better overall physically. Cough is pretty bad. And by like day 10, I should say, I was sort of lulled into a false sense of security. Like I felt better. Nose was still a bit runny. Nose was getting less runny, but it was still runny, and I was still coughing a bit. And I thought, hey, I feel a little better. Maybe I'll go for a hike, because I like to hike. I'm an avid hiker. I'm actually on a hike right now. Not too much of one, but because I didn't have to hike very far to get here. But anyway, I thought, I'll go for a hike. So I set myself up to do about a 5 mile hike or so, with some ups and downs, some vertical inclines. So I start hiking, and I get maybe 10 minutes into it, and I'm like, oh gosh, this is hard. This is harder than normal. That run-down feeling started coming back. That sick run-down feeling started coming back as I was exerting myself. I tried to push through it as much as I could, but I didn't want to push it too hard. And I noticed when I would breathe in, I had like a rattling sound in my lungs. I'd breathe in, and it sounded like there was either lots of snot or fluid in my lungs. It sounded like a rattle when I would breathe in. And I was, had my productive cough, and my runny nose got a little bit worse as I was hiking. Just felt worse overall, so I ended up cutting my hike short because I just couldn't do the whole thing. I felt so run down, and I get back to my car, and I just felt so sick again. It just felt like the malaise didn't feel quite as bad as it did on day 4, but it felt, pretty bad. And driving home and just feeling like sick all over again. But I didn't have the body aches anymore by then. They were all gone. The next day I felt back to kind of how I did before I hiked. Slight amount of malaise, not too bad. Could definitely tell I was, on the mend. But the cough was still going kind of strong. The runny nose was still there. And that went on into the 3rd week a little bit. So I was noticeably sick for 2.5 weeks. And then those just gradually cleared up. The cough and the runny nose. So let me know in the comments below if you think maybe this sounds like COVID to you. Because there are a lot of elements of this that seem kind of COVID-esque. The wild fluctuations in my temperature. The fever that I had was higher than I've ever had with any cold, because I'm really anal about taking my temperature, no pun intended, orally, take my temperature orally, but I'm very religious about taking my temperature when I'm sick. And 102, yeah, definitely higher than any fever I've had with a cold. Generally lower than any fever I've had with a flu. Usually when I get the flu, it hits all at once, but this peaked on day 5, the temperature. And the other symptoms, the really bad ones peaked, well, some of the bad symptoms peaked on day 4, and then the other symptoms peaked on day 5 and 6, like the body aches. But yeah, it was weird with the body aches. Just felt like everything just hurt in kind of an unusual way. All the joints in my body just felt weird. And the sweats. And the way that this started with a cough and feeling run down. And I just can't recall ever having a cold or flu that started with a cough. If we did have it, you know, we probably don't have the antibodies anymore. They're talking about how the antibodies wear off quickly. But we probably still have the T and B cells. So if we did have COVID and we get it again, then hopefully the next time around won't be as severe, because the body will already have cells that recognize the virus and kill it from there. Leave your comments below in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you guys. Alright, so that's it. Be safe, be healthy.